So Keir Starmer U-turned on his plan to allow people to have the right to disconnect, i.e. essentially making it illegal for your boss to contact you out of hours unless you give them express permission yourself. Now, we've got the article, which has been excellently screenshotted. I say screenshot, it's been just taken a photo of by Grace Blakely in the paper. Let's have a read. Let's have a look. In proposals 2 years ago, the party said workers will have the new right to disconnect from work outside of working hours and not be contacted by their employer outside of working hours. Instead, the Times understands the policy looks likely to be an obligation on employers to draw up and agree policies with employees on out-of-hours working and contact, recognise there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Again, this should be opt-in for employees rather than having employers essentially set their own terms on this one. Coming to an agreement with the employees. And I'm like, well, who is the one who's got the power in this relationship who's going to be able to set what that policy looks like? The party is looking to France, Ireland and Belgium for inspiration. Where measures have been introduced in France, employees with more than 50 workers have drawn up a charter of good conduct. In Ireland, the practical effect of the policy has been employers adding disclaimers to their email signatures advising people that even if they receive the email out of hours, there is no obligation to reply. But I guess that technically, Ireland is closer to what they had before, but France is basically what they've watered it down to. They have to create this agreement of good conduct in which one set of the parties on this one is under duress because they need to be able to survive. And the other one is the person who is the employer, who has all of the power within that relationship to be able to set the terms. Well, you can't work here unless we need to contact you outside of hours. I get that there are going to be some jobs we're going to have to need to do that, but that should be opt-in for the employees. A slam dunk policy that nobody can argue against. Of course they'd U-turn. I'll tell you who can argue against it, Ashley D. I tell you who can argue against it. It's all of their new friends. All of their new friends at the Confederation of British Industry, including one of their friends from the CBI, who's now an MP, Keir Mather, who was a policy advisor at the CBI before becoming the MP for Selby and Ainsty at a tender young age after being an employee at a Labour constituency office as well. The pipeline to Labour MP is now effectively being somebody with links to industry who's then been seconded into somebody's office and then shoehorned into a by-election seat. Weird how that happens so often, isn't it? But those are the people who can argue against it, and those are the people who turn on the spending taps. There was a story today that another 50,000 people have left the Labour Party, presumably over the ditching of the Green policy and over their reaction to and response to the situation in Palestine. So they're going to need even more money from the Gary Lubners and Trevor Chins of this world and the Lord Sainsbury's of this world to ensure that they have election coffers up and running, because their memberships are dwindling. So what the donors want, the donors get. Key to this is that no employer would be required to follow a policy that they themselves have not agreed to, a source said, which basically means that there is no plan anymore, that there is no policy of this at all, that there's nothing here that's actually going to hold the employers to anything. But of course, the deal is going to be in full. The new deal for workers is going to be delivered in full. 3 days later, actually it's not going to be delivered in full anymore. Is it even ironic for Starmer to U-turn? That's basically, I guess, it's just his modus operandi at the moment. Par for the course. They probably think they're sacrificing this to retain the rest, but they're just ceding ground and showing that they can be bullied. Oh, 100%, Ben. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That this gets them nowhere electorally. Like this, there's like a gigantic cohort of SME owners in red wall swing seats that they're just kind of desperate to bring on board for like one election at the expense of shitting away all of their historic supporters and their links to trade unions and lots of the membership. But, they're getting donors from rich people. That's all that matters now. Oh, also, on top of this, a promise to introduce fair pay agreements where unions can negotiate a sector-wide wage floor will be limited to social care sector and is not being considered for other areas. Love that. Love that. So many people telling me, oh, you have to, even if all of the macro policy is bad, Helena, you have to vote Labour because the trade unions are going to get these new sectoral bargaining rights. Yeah, but no one other than carers are going to get access to these fair pay agreements. I thought these were going to be across loads of different sectors. I thought they were going to have loads of fair pay agreements, and I was like, umming and ahhing, oh, is this a policy that it's just social care? It's just social care they're going to get fair pay agreements for, chat. Originally, unions had drawn up a list of other sectors they wanted it expanded to. We need to prove the concept to make it a success, and only then would we think about whether it's a vehicle that would work in other sectors. Like, you don't need to have like a trial run of sectoral bargaining in the social care sector to be able to know whether it's going to be a model that works elsewhere. Because we already know the model works elsewhere. It's called the entirety of the Nordic countries. All of the Nordic countries have sectoral pay agreements. We know that the model works. But again, this is their things like their connections at the CBI. Literally, Rupert Soames, the head of the CBI, said we don't want a European model of wage setting. You know what the European model of wage setting is, chap? The European model of wage setting is sectoral bargaining between unions and consortiums of employers. That's what they didn't want to happen, and that is now not what is happening outside of social care. Labour had also promised to ban exploitative zero-hour contracts. This would not be an outright ban, recognising some people appreciate the flexibility, but will take the form of putting a duty on employers to provide a contract based on the hours people have worked for the preceding 12 weeks. Bosses are generally supportive of the aims, but have expressed reservations about how the plans will unfold, and the party has been warned by Lord Mandelson, a very scrupulous individual, I'll have you know, not to rush the changes. MRP polls showing they're getting 450 seats, then just scrapping this is infuriating. Summer could literally shoot someone and people will still vote Labour at this point. I mean, you're absolutely right, Sockdem George. They have no reason to do this electorally. But remember, I keep saying that the one metric that matters for Labour in terms of policy is what they need to do to get elected, which is true, but they also have a second metric, and that is what do the donors want? What's going to give them enough money from their donors to be able to fund their election war chest? Remember again, it's really important to point this out, this is the first time in history that individual donations from people with large amounts of money have ever outstripped union funding in terms of donations, ever. Even throughout the Blair years, the unions were still the biggest funders of the Labour Party. And now it's individual donors from like billionaires and people from private equity and from capital investment firms. It's the first time in history. So these people don't want to have their money being spent on a curtailment of what they are there to do, which is generate revenue for shareholders, which is harder for them to do if they have to pay workers more and if they are less able to hire and fire whenever they want. A YouGov poll for the Times previously found 86% supported the right to disconnect, 79% supported giving employees the right to work flexibility, and 71% support increasing the level of statutory sick pay. So these are literally incredibly popular reforms, and the fact they keep watering this shit down is just silly. But again, it's not silly if you need to know that you need donors on site. That's it. TUC plan to use fair pay agreements to create a 15-hour minimum wage. Like, it would be so good if this were just, like, entirely across the board. Like, when I thought that the FPAs were going to be, like, across all industries, that was the one thing that could still get me to vote Labour, because that's a big deal. That's a really big deal. But the fact that it's just going nowhere because they're desperate to only have it in, like, a public sector rather than in a private sector to upset their donors, it's pathetic. It's absolutely pathetic. I mean, hopefully the TUC push this hard. But this is the kind of thing where watering down this kind of stuff, this is the kind of point where you go, well, what's the fucking point in being affiliated to the party anymore? What is the point in the trade unions being affiliated to the party when they do much more from the outside? Unite the Union have been doing way more on ending NHS privatisation from the outside using industrial action than you'll get from the current Labour Party based on Wes Streeting's plans to use more private sector. Unite the Union, as part of their negotiated settlement for NHS porters, said we will keep going on strike unless you bring us back in-house rather than through an agency. And they got that. They got that as part of their negotiation in terms of industrial action. So our friends of the show over at Talk TV have been discussing this. Have been discussing yet another Labour U-turn. Anyway, let's have a watch.
So Labour, Adam, you mentioned this, and I think it's a really important point. Labour has softened key policies in its overhaul of workers' rights in response to business fears about the cost impact of their plans. Now, you mentioned this. He's planning the most extensive overhaul of workers' rights in a generation, including cracking down on zero-hours contracts and giving employees enhanced protections from day one in a job. As Renee says, businesses have expressed fears the measures will raise costs, increase pressure, and hamper the economic recovery. Now, one of the things that caught my eye this morning is this right to disconnect, through which employees would have been entitled not to be contacted by their bosses outside their working hours. Workers, they say, will have a new right to disconnect from work outside working hours and not be contacted by their employer outside working hours. As
It's also worth pointing out as well, this has literally just been passed legislatively in Australia. The ALP got forced into doing it by the Greens. So that's what happens when you elect people to the left of the centre-left party. They push for better policy. The Greens in Australia pushed for right to disconnect from the ALP. The ALP relented. The Greens in the Senate pushed for $1 billion of upfront funding for social housing to the Housing Australia Future Fund bill, which was relented to by the ALP. So if you elect people to the left of Labour, you can push them on policy. I know we don't have the same electoral system as Australia do, whether it's legislatively or rhetorically, in terms of the way in which they're viewed in the media, the way in which you can attack them as far as the platform is concerned. This is why electing people to the left of Labour is so important, because you can see the results over in Australia.
A businessman and an entrepreneur, what do you make of that?
Well, the whole thing, I think, is dangerous and worrying. I think when you zone in and focus on specific policies that can help, where does this become a priority? I don't understand how this is a priority of the Labour government. I think we're already in a society where people are being encouraged, and the working mentality, the work ethic has been declining. It's declined massively.
This is the irony is that actually people are working longer hours than they ever have in this country. We are getting to the point where people are working harder than they've ever worked and getting paid less than they've ever been paid. Productivity may be down, but that's because of like a lack of investment. And of course, we have kind of historic problems with labour force participation rate. But in terms of like the hours people individually work, like people are working super hard. It's just GDP per hour worked is low. It's like the measure of productivity. Because people have to do side hustles to be able to survive. People are humping shit for Uber Eats. They're working gig economy jobs that don't pay them very well, are necessarily unproductive, especially as we moved over to an entirely service-based economy. People have to work really hard nowadays. All of this work ethic is going away. It's essentially a reaction to people who are massively overworked, like young people nowadays, massively overworked, saying, well, actually, can we not work like a day less? Because all of the studies show that you get more productive when you do a 4-day week, or whether you work like 6-hour days, 5 days a week. You actually are more productive on the same pay over that shorter period of time in total productivity, not just GDP per hour worked in that case. That's what the statistics say about this. People are like, actually, I don't want to be continually badgered in like the rat race, trying to get a promotion by having to be the person who's contacting my boss out of hours most. Now, this is miserable. It's a miserable way to live. It's a miserable way to live. But of course, I understand SMEs are important. The real enemy are the corporations. The real enemy is big business. The real enemy is people who control huge swathes of the economy. But I will have a go like SME bosses, like SME owners, because a lot of these people see their little business. Not all of them do, and not necessarily a majority, but there's a certain amount of SME owners like this person over here who want to treat their business like their own little fiefdom, in the same way that kind of landlords do. And so any amount of policy that would infringe on that, they absolutely lash out at. Any pushback from their own employees on terms of their own autonomy, they get this because it's their little baby. It's their little baby that you're interfering with by wanting things like, I don't know, basic workers' rights or holiday pay or terms and conditions. Because that eats into, even more obviously to an SME owner, their own personal payout from their own company that they own. They're eating into what they feel is rightfully theirs because they've got so much close contact with it, unlike shareholders or like a larger LLC. Again, not all of them are like this, but there's certainly a small subset. Again, yeah, the we're all family here types, yeah, 100%. Like, you should be privileged to work for me in my SME, that you shouldn't want to collectively bargain. You shouldn't want better terms and conditions and sick pay and holiday pay and all that kind of malarkey.
Massively since COVID, people with the working from home. Now people apply for jobs. When they apply for jobs, they say, do I have to come in? Oh, can I work from home? Like, we've already got all of this stuff going on.
That's a brilliant point.
It's madness. It is literally madness for an employer that when we now go to recruit and we are building a business, people go, do you want me there? Oh yeah, I do want it. Oh, and I do want more money, but no, I don't want to come in. Like, you have got some mental stuff going on. And then Labour come in and go, oh, also give them the right to disconnect, or give them this and give them that. It is absolute.
Or yeah, workers wanting things like being treated like a human. How dare they? Again, exactly what I was talking about. Getting so mad. I'm supposed to be I'm the job creator in my SME. I'm the job creator. And the government's expecting me to give back to the people whose surplus value I'm extracting? How dare they? Again, it's this kind of new world that we live in where there's no kind of relationship between the two. They don't even recognize the conflict under a neoliberal mindset. It's cultural neoliberalism. Again, it's very similar to how landlords do this stuff, where people will propose going back to a previous model that worked under, but they've only lived under like a neoliberal model. They're like, that's not just a competitive market. This is government regulation. This is socialism. That's it. It's the same kind of... Again, I'm not going to blame him personally. I mean, he's probably worked hard to be an owner of an SME, like whatever. But the mindset that puts you in, the mindset that neoliberalism has created is just really toxic. Where something basic like, please can I have my home life to be my home life? Or please can I have the flexibility to be able to work what I want to work rather than have to follow all of your rules, is treated like completely ridiculous by these people, when it should be really basic.
Madness.
When Labour first came in, most recently in
But
97,
why is this an area of concern?
All businesses said, oh, these crazy ideas like the minimum wage are going to ruin businesses. It's going to be so terrible. Now it's all right. It's accepted, and it didn't ruin business.
But I tell you what, minimum wage and the increasing of minimum wage is putting pressure on businesses. Businesses are struggling. I train thousands of businesses, and there are business owners that are concerned about employing people. The minimum wage is skyrocketing, which then is going to affect people's pricing, which is
Let's just go back to the right to disconnect.
Also worth pointing out as well that there's not necessarily any evidence that minimum wage increases have a disemployment effect. They can push prices up, the evidence does show that, but never usually more than the extra spending power that working people get. You've got to remember, like under the old Fordist model, like before we had the New Deal, and there was kind of, this was put out by governments in terms of the setting of labour markets through government policy. In the kind of laissez-faire era, the Fordist model of employment, where actually we want to pay our employees more so they can afford our products, was how good business owners knew that they would be able to get more consumers. If people have more money to spend, they can buy more of your products. And also on top of that, when they say, oh, well, we have to put prices up to cover the costs, well, first of all, that doesn't necessarily take into account the extra business you get by people having more consumptive power. But on top of that, how you set prices is not based upon whether or not your workers are being paid more or not. It probably will affect your overheads. It will affect how much profit you make out. But the price you set your commodities at, the price you sell your commodity at, is set by supply and demand. That is what sets the price, is supply and demand. Not like how much profit you want to make. Like landlords do this all the time, where they say, well, if interest rates go up, my mortgage payments have gone up, so I have to put your rent up. And I'm like, no, you can put your rent up because that's what supply demand dictates within the market. That's it. That is where the point of pricing is set at. It's supply against demand. It's where they intersect. It has nothing to do with how much your costs are. If your costs get to the point where you can only make a profit by selling over the cost of supply and demand where they intersect, you have got a failing business. You do not have a product that you can take to market.
What I think about this is I don't feel so strongly about the right to disconnect, because I do think people have a right to their own life and to not be harassed outside of work. But that does depend on them actually going to work and doing the job that they're meant to do.
I kind of agree with Renee on this, because I think it's about creating a happy medium. I'm sort of personally of the view that I like being in the office, and I think especially for more junior colleagues, the way COVID and the way we've shifted to a lot of areas just being digitally in these kind of meetings, it takes a huge amount of strain, because what would become a 2-minute chat of, oh, can you just show me how to do that in the computer? Oh yeah, come here, I'll show you how it's done. Is now, oh, let me schedule in a Zoom meeting with you so I can show you how to do this.
So
No, you just call on Teams and share your screen. Like, it's super easy. Like, the fact that people are being told to go into the office like 2 whatever days it is a week, and they just end up on Teams anyway. Like, I worked in a call centre. I work like bargain basement employment, and even I know this. Even I know what it's like.
Hang on. Yeah. In terms of the right to disconnect, I think there has to be a medium with that, because in previous generations you didn't have the technology of a boss WhatsApping you. You used to have landlines, and it would be a very rare thing for a boss to call your home on a landline. It'd have to be a real emergency. So it's about reapplying that, and I think, this is something that's been tried and tested in a lot of other European countries like Ireland, where there's a kind of reasonableness of saying, look, I might not get back to you because I'm off and I'm entitled to my time off. And I think it's finding that happy medium where some businesses
it's
can't
an employee
exploit
market, though. Let me tell you, it's an employee market. And if you are a mad boss that is mentally going after your people outside of hours, they ain't going to work for you anyway. That's the reality.
Well,
but if you need
I mean, it's only an employee market at time of recording. First of all, the government are trying to make that even harder by kneecapping unions, by doing supply-side labour market reform, all that jazz that I've talked about on the stream like 1,000 times. But unemployment is going up. We had like this tight labour market for a while, but that's going away. And it's going away because the Bank of England are keeping rates high, specifically because they don't want wages going up under a tight labour market because they're worried about a wage price spiral that isn't even happening. Infuriating.
A little bit of just information that is critical to a small business in a moment. When you have a small business, you have 10 people running a business, each person retains information that is critical to the running of that business. If that person is uncontactable, it creates a massive strain on a small business. So
Well, that's why it should be only ever opt-in for the employee. Like, if you're somebody who has to be on call and you're getting into your job, yeah, you're opting into that if you want to be on call. That's fine. But outside of that, like, it should absolutely be entirely at the discretion of the employee whether they're happy to be contacted or not.
I think that if you put a rule in that says that you can't do that, then that's a real issue for a business owner. But I think business owners generally should be respectful of their employees' time and build a good culture.
I agree with that.
Yes, and I think, David, what this risks doing, Labour's...
And I'm sure they're going to do it. I'm sure that they'll do it if the employees just ask nicely. If they just ask nicely, I'm sure the employers will be absolutely fine. There's no material difference between the interests of each group here whatsoever. There's no conflict between them at all. Nothing. Nothing at all. It's just a nice, happy family where one person works and then, as a treat, they get a pizza party.
Plans actually risk taking us to the same kind of employment scenario that France have. And basically in France, you can never fire anyone. It doesn't matter how useless they are. It's jobs for life. What that does is it gets rid of a meritocracy because people don't need to try.
No, exactly.
And actually,
I mean, there was never a meritocracy to begin with, but like in the old school model, in the post-war consensus, people did get jobs for life. People didn't get hired and fired that often. Like the level of turnover people had when they just had a vocation they worked in for a very long time in our industrial society. That never used to be the case that turnover was so high. Turnover being high is a new thing.
that's terrifying.
But isn't France a stronger economy than ours?
I'll have to check
Yes.
that.
Yeah,
I
I'd
think
have
it
to
is
check that.
just, but I think it is. But
I was going to say we're pretty much on parity, in fact.
But I think it's.
But you can't put that down to one thing. anyway.
You can't put that as one thing.
But living standards are higher in France. Living standards are like way higher than ours. Let's say, well, their growth might be slightly higher or lower, something slightly higher than ours. Their debt to GDP ratio is higher, but they have way higher living standards because they retire at 62, even after like the pension reforms. I guess 64 if you've started work from 18. I would love to know what these bosses would do if an employee WhatsApped them outside of work hours for payroll queries or holiday requests. Yeah, true.
But hang on a minute, there's the point. So particularly I'm freelance, right? So everyone contacts me the whole time.
Yeah.
So, and I've run a small business,
Yeah.
and I totally agree with what you say. But actually, this doesn't necessarily need legislation, does it? It needs respect.
I
That
think
underpins
where
this.
there are very good business owners and people that do take those into account, that's fine. You probably don't need it, but there will always be people who exploit.
But I
and
think
there
the
will always
employee
be-
will vote with their feet.
Okay,
right?
but then
Because it's-
True. Yeah, exactly. They'll go vote with their feet. There's not any other game at play here. It's just tiny little individuals floating through dreamland, interacting with each other in mutually beneficial transactions. There are no broader power arrangements here over who has access to the means of production and who doesn't. This is what fucking frustrates me. What makes me go mad about neoliberalism is just how this mindset, that mindset you saw right there, of just, well, people will vote with their feet. People can vote with their dollar. Like the Reem Ibrahim tweet that Curtis covered on Turn Left yesterday, where she was just like, oh, well, you know, you can just choose to be homeless. You can just choose not to eat. That's a choice that you've made to exchange these goods and services. As if that isn't incredibly coercive, right? It's Coconut Islands shit. Honestly, like market fundamentalism is like an absolute toxin on the body politic in this country.
And is this not like risk in the world? You know, we're trying now to legislate for
Yeah,
everything
exactly.
and take risk out of
But there has
everybody's
to be.
life.
I think
You
there has to be.
can't.
But there has to be, especially when it comes to an important area like employment. There has to be basic levels of protection, and where bosses are seen
There's
to
more
not
than
provide
basic
it,
levels of protection
well, but
right
there isn't.
now.
When
There's
people,
huge amounts of
but
protection,
when they're-
and they want to increase, and Labour want to focus on this area.
yes, the party of
Huge amounts of protection, yeah. Try that in Norway, mate.
workers wants to vote because of
I-
workers' rights.
When
not
you're already
horror.
running a business, it is difficult enough when you're bringing employees in. There's a lot of small business owners that are terrified to employ people,
Bits and
terrified,
bobs.
which then stops the economy growing, and putting more of these rules in place just makes you
Terrified
suffer
to
more.
employ young.
I mean, I don't think there's actually any truth to this statement. If somebody has some stats to disprove me in the comments later about small enterprises who are scared to employ people, like, I call bullshit on that. I call absolute bullshit. Maybe if we made it cooperative, though, it wouldn't matter, because then everybody would be sharing the proceeds, and there would no longer be a conflicting relationship between the people who own the means of production and those who have to sell their labour to those who do own the means of production. Crazy. I know of an idea where people work together for something and share the proceeds together, but, you know, maybe I'm just a fusty old Marxoid. Hey there, if you enjoyed the video, make sure that you like and leave a comment. That helps the video out in the algorithm. If you subscribe and ring the bell, it'll let you know when I go live. I stream every day on YouTube and Twitch. You can also follow all of my socials down in the description. And if you want to support me in a more financial manner, there's a join button for membership to just 99p to be a member on YouTube, as well as a Patreon, and there's some merch there as well. And hopefully I'll catch you on the next video. Take care.